Hi, everyone. You are watching The Self Connection with Ginny Brown and Kelly Pietro, where we have conversations with a group of ascended masters known as the Multitude of the Greater Good.
And the multitude is a group of ascended masters and higher energy level beings who answer Kelly's questions, and she comes up with some good ones, and so do our viewers. So thank you for sending in your questions, and the multitude is always happy to answer them all. So thank you, everyone, and I'm sure Kelly has some good questions today.
I have some questions themed around health and illness and sort of thing. So I just want to put out a disclaimer that this is for entertainment purposes only. We're talking about like the spiritual underpinnings of these things. And, um, none of this is meant to replace a doctor in any way.
It's the energetic level is what I am able to connect into. And a lot of our health issues are attributable or able to be healed on the energetic level. However, the physical issues of the physical body also need eh, eh, I know for myself, I tend to go to the energetic level to heal things, which is great. It's good to do. It's also my physical body needs a physical doctor. So I would just say uh, it's a balance between the energetic and the physical. Um, one is not greater than the other. They are both necessary on the earth plane.
Absolutely. So, the first topic I wanted to cover was cancer, because that's a big one.
Yeah.
And I'd like to try to understand, you know, what causes cancer from the energetic standpoint.
It is important to understand that each one comes to the earth plane to learn, and some choose to learn in a health reflected area of energetic being, and some come to learn in different areas of learning. However, cancer is one that allows one not only to experience the sense of helplessness and hopelessness, but also the sense of allowing oneself the ability to accept help. When one is able to accept the help that is available, it allows one to heal and experience things that one had never been able to experience or heal before. In our estimation, cancer is directed to oneself by one's willingness to open to learning to be who one is. There are those contributing factors on the earth plane, certain things of abilities and inabilities. However, in our estimation, when one chooses to learn, many times it's through an illness of being rather than through an energetic connection of being. Do not be concerned.
Hmm. Okay, so there's this theory out there. It's called German New Medicine. And I'm not going to get it 100% right because I'm not well versed in it. So my apologies to anyone who's listening and would do a better job at this. But my understanding is that the theory has to do with um, a person would experience some sort of emotional trauma, like let's say loss of a loved one. And that trauma creates a situation in the body that allows cancer to form. And that by the time the cancer is noticeable and formed, it's an indication of a healing process, that the body will rid itself of it as part of the healing process. But then the theory continues that oftentimes the cancer gets detected by a medical person, and the diagnosis of cancer creates a secondary trauma. And that's where you might see metast metastasize. Is that the right word? Is that how you say it? Um, and so then it's like it has spread. But in this German new medicine theory, it's like it didn't spread. That's like a new trauma to overcome and allow the body to heal. And so some of it is like I think some of the theory says that the body will heal itself and rid itself of the cancer through a natural process. And more you hear people talking about, oh, if you biopsy, that's how you end up spreading the cancer. If you remove it, you risk the cells kind of getting away and creating more havoc. What does the multitude have to say about these theories?
It is important to understand that there are many, many theories available for one's perusal. However, we can tell you cancer is that part of self that says, I am not happy with this, I am not happy with that. And when it is that you recognize your own unhappiness, you will allow the cancer to dissolve itself. There are portions of that new theory that are quite correct. And then there are portions that are negligible. There are those parts of being that inquire or require a great deal of expertise in many areas. There are those parts of self that are quite able to heal themselves. However, in our estimation, it is important to understand the energetic self is quite able to heal a great deal. The physical self, however, is not quite so responsive to the energetic if one's belief system does not allow one to believe that it can be healed on the energetic level. When one is able to say, oh, okay, I'm on the earth plane, I've come to experience and allow. I am allowing myself to experience an experience of devastation, one might say. Therefore, one is emotionally uh, connected or contracted with oneself in order to allow the emotion to be like set aside and allow the physical process to take place. However, it is the emotion that is the culprit in this situation. The emotion is that part of self that is requiring the healing. When one can say, oh, I am unhappy with my life, therefore, there is no reason for me to move on further. One will give oneself a reason to allow oneself the inability to be on the earth plane. We can tell you when one says, oh, okay, I am feeling that this is an inappropriate action for myself, and I am feeling that this is a part of me that is requiring healing within itself. One will allow the emotional connection to be made and healed. Therefore, we would highly recommend that each one allow oneself to connect with the emotion of the inability of being and the emotion of allowing the energetic self to be completed and processed. However, when one disregards the emotion, the only other way is in physicality. Therefore, the physical um, environments, the physical uh, precautions, the physical um, creations are quite necessary in order to help one heal. However, it is important that both be taken into consideration when one is dealing with such an acute sense of being. Therefore, we would highly recommend that each one allow oneself the energetic connection of being, allow oneself to knowing that it is the emotional self that is requiring healing, and then allow oneself to understand that the emotional self is part of the process, but not all of the process. And when one allows oneself in the emotional state to connect with oneself, and also allows oneself in the physical state to connect with oneself, one is able to allow the healing to It's like take place. Do not be concerned, all is love.
Okay, so there are a lot of, okay, so like German New Medicine is one of them, but also there's plenty of other people out there who have claimed theories like to make that connection, in other words, to make the emotional connection based on where the cancer exists in the body. So, for example, breast cancer has to do with nurturing the self. Like perhaps you've not nurtured yourself enough and you haven't considered yourself enough. Um, so that's the emotional thing to address. Perhaps something like prostate cancer would have more to do with how you are in relationship with your partner. Um, you know, I don't know. I don't know what other people are saying off the top of my head, but I of course always think of the chakras. Like if it's bone cancer, to me that's root chakra that has to do with early childhood, abandonment issues, safety, security, stability, maybe moving a lot. Okay, so in other words, people have these theories about making the emotional connection based on where the cancer is in the body. Is that a good way for someone to help themselves make those emotional connections? Because, like you said, they people don't always know like that there's an emotional underpinning happening with cancer. And so now perhaps this video is bringing light to that, and more people talking about it is bringing light to it, but people don't know how to make those connections. Would those types of guides be helpful, or is it not necessarily always accurate?
It is It is important to understand that as each one moves forward in each one's own process on the earth plane, each one is able to become aware of many different things differently. There are those parts of self that say, oh, like I'm seeing, for instance, my arm hurts. My arm hurts for there's a cut on my arm. It is important to understand that when one acknowledges that cut on one's arm, one is able to say, oh, I know how to take care of that. I will use this, this, and this, and I will allow the body to heal itself. And when one acknowledges a certain aspect of being, one is able to acknowledge the emotional aspect involved. When one has a cut on one arm, one can say, oh, how'd I do that? I must have done this, that, or the other thing. And then they can say, oh, it's like I was so stupid, or I was unable to allow myself to be more of me and protect myself in that way. Therefore, it is important to understand that when one goes through these processes of intellectualizing why one did such a thing, one is unable to come up with an option precisely because it is not a physical healing that is required. It is the energetic acknowledgement that, excuse me, oh, I must have done this or I must have done that, and allow the healing to take place. In our estimation, it is important that you understand that as it is that one moves forward on the higher and greater levels of physicality inability, one is able to move forward differently. We would highly recommend that one acknowledge who one is, when one is, and why one is. And when one is able to acknowledge the self, one is more able to say, oh, I did this or I did not do that. I did this and I did not do that. That is where the greater healing lies. And when one can focus on one specific area of one's being, it is always applicable, always helpful. However, when one says, oh, I have this here because I did not do this, one cannot necessarily allow oneself to understand that that is not always the case. That is not always the option. The option is to see oneself differently, to understand that one comes to the earth plane, one has choices of being, and one takes care of oneself in the best way possible. Do not be concerned, all is love.
Okay, yeah, so to me, it's like, it's not a one size fits all. Those,
Exactly.
those things that people say, it can be true. Like, I know when clients come to me, um, I have this library of knowledge, right? Whatever it is I've studied the chakras, so I do relate in that way. And I allow that to guide me through a session with someone, right? So if they come in with a physical ailment, I might ponder, oh, that feels like a solar plexus chakra thing. And I can feel into if there's truth there or not, right? So like it's like an opportunity to question and say, is it? And be open to the no answer. Like, I know it, digestion goes with the solar plexus, but that doesn't mean that's what's happening here, you know? So it's like it can be a good guide and tool, but it's not a one size fits all because
Right,
everyone's unique.
right.
Okay. So Mm, just a closing statement, I think, because we're getting close to our time, Ginny, is were you going to say something?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking back when my mom passed away, she had lung cancer. So I'm thinking, well, that's not necessarily uh, like neglect or whatever one might say with breast cancer, but that's the same heart chakra. But
Hmm.
it's like, okay, but she smokes and she was 10 years old and she died at 85. So what's one going to say that it's caused by lack of self-care, caused by smoking? You know, it's
Yeah.
it's it's
Okay,
back.
so that's actually a great example because people will universally say lungs are where grief gets stored. And so perhaps she didn't express grief or she was holding on to too much grief. Like that's what you would hear often.
Yeah,
Right? But I don't know, like, I didn't know your mom. Like, do you feel like that's true? Or do you feel like, um, no, she didn't really have a lot of grief. It probably was the smoking that created the environment for her to experience cancer because that's what her soul wanted,
right.
right? So,
Yeah. There's probably grief. I don't know. You know, I don't know.
yeah, so I know, like, for me, I might have those, I don't want to say rules, but like those tidbits in my back pocket as something to lean into as a possibility to help guide me, but I have to be open to the possibility that that's not what's happening with every person. And so, yeah, like using your intuitive senses to lean in. Because I think that's mostly what people end up coming to me for is like, oh, I've got this physical thing, and I'm already feeling the energetic underpinnings, the emotional
Right,
aspect that's not been acknowledged. So to me, that's what I see my job to be is to talk to them enough to get to that thing so they can feel that feeling,
right,
acknowledge it, and then begin the energetic healing process so
right,
that when they do the physical healing, the radiation, the whatever they choose to do, if they choose to do plants, whatever, that is handling the physical aspect, whereas the emotion part has to be acknowledged too. Yeah.
which, it's like one needs to work hand in hand with the other sometimes, but the emotional aspect needs to be acknowledged, and I don't think a lot of people understand the emotional aspect, and many people will just brush that aside when that is a great deal of the issue is in the emotional arena. and needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I think that when you address the emotional, right? So you may have allowed yourself to release the energy or integrate the energetic aspect of what's going on. But that may not be enough to also open up to the healing of that, right? And so for them, like they can acknowledge, be like, oh yeah, that actually resonates. That's probably true. But there might be part of them that's like, okay, but that's not going to heal me just because I acknowledge that one thing. So I also have to go through this process of, radiation, chemo, or people do the natural way, or whatever it is they choose to believe that can heal them. And it's also choosing to believe that they can be healed is part of that process, I think.
That's true. I believe that true. I believe that too. However, I also know that when one acknowledges the emotion, and allows it to be healed, it's a big part of their experience of healing. But one just can't say on the mental level, okay, so all right, there's an emotion there needs to be healed. One actually has to feel the feeling and allow the feeling to allow the healing.
Sure, yeah. And then, just again, like the multitude talked about helplessness and hopelessness. It's
Yeah.
like stepping out of that as well, in addition to whatever that
Mhm.
initial emotion that had to be felt, stepping out of the helplessness, hopelessness, or allowing yourself to feel helpless and hopeless to come out of it, then, right? To express the feeling, let that feeling come up and out.
Yeah.
And
But heal other things too
yeah,
on the emotional level. So,
yeah, yeah, for sure. We're talking about cancer, but this can be applied to really anything.
right.
So, okay, so if the multitude has a very quick closing message about anything they want us to know about healing from cancer.
It is important to understand that there are those processes that one needs to experience on the earth plane, and cancer is one way of allowing oneself to experience. However, there are other ways of experiencing, and cancer is not always necessary. Therefore, we would highly recommend that each one allow each one's own self to be who one is, when one is. And if one wishes to heal, cancer is not always necessary. A physical illness is not always necessary. However, an acknowledgement of one's feelings is always necessary. Therefore, we would highly recommend that each one allow themselves to feel their feelings. And when one feels one's feelings, one heals one's feelings. Do not be concerned. There you go.
Thanks, Ginny, and thank you to the multitude for being here, providing great answers and insights, and Ginny for channeling all the answers.
We are most pleased to share our expertise. Thank you for asking.
Okay.
So thank you, Kelly, for your questions, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I hope we can help. Well, I'm open to helping in any way I can. So there.
All of our links are in the video description if you want to reach out to Ginny for one-on-one. And if you want to submit your questions, we look forward to seeing you next time on the Self Connection.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.